Hello and welcome back. This is the week 13 lecture. So I will keep this one relatively brief. We can sort of treat this week as a short week since obviously Thanksgiving is coming up soon. So I want us to continue discussing argument. And I'll go over a few additional strategies today. Mostly, I just want to talk a little bit about the Tolman model and the Rogerian model of argumentation. These are just two structures, two organizational schemes that we can use to help build our own arguments when the time comes for us to do that. So I also want to spend a little bit of time just sort of introducing Essay 4. We won't really get into that until after Thanksgiving. So in week 14, in my week 14 lecture, I'll talk more about the assignment. We'll start doing a little bit of research in week 14, and we'll get a little bit more specific about what exactly we need to do. This week, I just want to cover a few more general concepts, keep it brief, and kind of get us ready to start working on Essay 4 next week after Thanksgiving. So I posted a bunch of stuff in the week 13 overview, maybe a little bit too much. So I wanted to give us kind of a review of what we had covered last week, just some of these basic concepts, claims, the different types of evidence that we can use. So last week we talked about artistic appeals, a concept passed down to us from Aristotle and ancient Greece, the emotional appeals, the logical appeals, and then we also talked about ethos, which really refers to the credibility of the author or speaker. So I reposted all of that stuff, and we also talked about inartistic appeals, which are often just considered to be evidence, the most common types of evidence that we will use when constructing argumentative papers. So we're going to find a lot of that evidence through our research. So we talked about numerical evidence, statistics, proportions, maybe even surveys and polls. We also talked about testimonials, the direct experiences or words of experts on one hand, but also perhaps just everyday people who have firsthand experience with the event or issue being discussed. And then we also just talked about examples, specific examples. We've already talked about examples weeks ago, but we've been kind of looking specifically at anecdotes, extended examples that often take the form of narratives. And they just, again, serve as an illustration or proof of the point or claim that we are trying to make. So these are just all tools. These are all methods that we can use when we are building our own arguments. And I've posted commercials and some other examples of arguments. We're also, of course, reading examples of arguments in 50 essays. So as we're looking at all of these different arguments being made in different formats, let's pay attention to the strategies and the methods that the authors or the advertisers are using to make these arguments. Because again, in commercials, we can see pathos. In that toothpaste commercial, we can see testimonials. We hear from a dentist. So we get the expert opinion. And then we also hear from everyday people, regular users of Colgate who have seen a difference. And they can speak directly to the powers, the teeth whitening powers of this toothpaste. So we're getting regular people and experts giving us their words, their experiences, and of course we use that as evidence. And, that's all review. So hopefully you have a good handle on all of that stuff. And again, we're thinking about claims, not statements of fact. We are developing original, debatable statements that we can pursue in essay form. And I'll tell you a little bit more about the types of claims that we are going to start generating towards the end of lecture. So again, today, let's talk about the Tolman model, and then let's talk a little bit about the Rogerian sort of argumentative style. We don't have to use either one of these structures directly, word for word, or anything like that, but they are just ways to think about arguments. They are ways to build arguments. They'll just help you in the days and weeks to come. So I like to start with the Tolman model because it's really straightforward. It's really easy to understand. It was created by this philosopher named Stephen Tolman, and this isn't terribly important for us, but what he was trying to do was create a sort of structure that mirrored the way real people make real arguments in everyday life. So he wanted to keep it pretty simple, and basically he just identified kind of 3 levels or 3 steps to any successful argument. And I've put this in the overview so you guys can follow along. You can see this. On top, we have a claim, and we've already talked about claims. Debatable statements that might spark, some kind of controversy or debate. Underneath the claim, we are going to provide reasons and evidence. So this is very important, but it's also just sort of common sense. I mean, even if you're having a casual argument with a friend or a family member about something trivial, or maybe about sports or politics, not like, you might think that those things are very important, but just things that, just any argument and any everyday argument, you're never going to let claims just sort of hang out there on their own. You always have to provide reasons and evidence, otherwise people are going to be less than convinced by your claims. This is instinctive. Most of us kind of already know how to make arguments. We can't just make claims. We start with claims, but then we have to support those claims with reasons and evidence. So going back to kind of the example that I was using last week, if I'm making a claim such as college should be free for all high school graduates in the U.S. Okay, so that's my claim. That's a debatable statement, obviously. If I want to make that claim, and if I want to use that claim to build a successful argument, there are obviously reasons and evidence that I'll be able to provide. So just as an example, my reason that I put directly underneath my claim is increasing tuition prices are preventing a lot of students from pursuing higher education. So that's a reason why my claim is true or at least reasonable. But I can't stop with the reason. Now I need some actual evidence. Now sometimes reasons might appear in the form of evidence, but a lot of times the reason will be another statement, or it will be an observation, or it will be some kind of, concept, idea, and then you'll need some evidence right alongside it. And that evidence could be many different things. It could be numerical, it could be a testimonial, whatever you want. In this case, for me, for the kind of argument I'm making, I would like to bring in some numerical data here. Right after I provide that reason, hey, a lot of people aren't pursuing college because of the cost, or maybe I could provide a reason about student debt. See, a lot of those types of reasons would really lend themselves well to numerical evidence, some kinds, statistics, or maybe I could conduct some kind of survey. Maybe I could ask high school graduates about their concerns, the issues they might be having with, financing their college education. So I could have survey results. I could have statistics. I could have some form of hard numerical data to go along with my claim and my reason. And of course, I could have multiple reasons. It would be good to have multiple reasons to support a lot of your big claims. So if you can always provide reasons and evidence to support not only, of course, your central claim, which will be your thesis, but also all of the important smaller claims that you make throughout your paper, all of those supporting claims that I think we mentioned a little bit last week, if you can always support those with good reasons and strong evidence, you're going to most likely have a successful argument. So that's pretty much all the Tolman model is. There's a little bit more to it. We don't need to dive all the way down to the bottom, but I do just want to talk a little bit about the warrant, because I included this in the overview. This is kind of weird and a little bit harder to understand perhaps than claims, reasons, and evidence. But the warrant is the third level of the basic Tolman model structure. But what's weird about it is it usually remains unsaid or unwritten. So, unlike the claims and the reasons and the evidence, the warrant will not really appear in your paper. It's an unspoken assumption that you, the writer, should share with your audience. That's the idea. So this is kind of weird, but it kind of relates back to ethos a little bit, and it kind of relates to your relationship with your audience. This requires you to kind of understand your audience a little bit, because the whole idea of the warrant is, in order for your argument to work, there has to be some level of agreement. You have to be sort of aligned with your audience when it comes to certain big picture sort of issues and values. So, for example, with the argument that I'm making here, an assumption that I am hoping that I share with my audience would be that college is valuable, and it's important that we make college education more accessible to more American students. Again, that might seem kind of obvious or common sense, and yeah, a lot of times warrants will be. But of course, you guys know not everybody on earth will necessarily agree that college is a super valuable thing and we should make it really accessible and really easy for anybody who wants to go. Not everybody thinks that. Not everybody agrees with that. So again, I need to you've probably heard the expression read the room. That's kind of what you're doing with your audience when you're constructing arguments. You have to have at least some idea, a general idea of the basic values and sort of beliefs and positions of your audience. So if I'm speaking to an audience that's maybe a little bit hostile to the idea of higher education for whatever reason, then my whole argument might break down, because even though I'm making strong claims and I'm offering reasons and I have specific evidence, if they don't really think that college is all that great anyway, then my argument's not going to gain a lot of traction with them. But of course, in a college setting, if I'm writing a paper in a class and I know that a professor will read it and I know my classmates might read it and we're all in a college environment, well, now I know that my audience is probably going to be pretty receptive to this basic assumption that, yeah, we should make college more affordable because it's good to go to college, right? Again, that's the underlying assumption. The warrant is like kind of the foundation in some ways. It's the underlying assumption that the entire argument is kind of built on in a lot of ways, but it's not directly a part of your argument. So again, you're not going to directly state in your paper, college is good, more people should go. That's just an unspoken assumption that you share with your audience. So we don't have to worry about that too much, but you do need to consider your audience as you're building your arguments, beginning next week. So it is something to keep in mind. And then I can't remember now, but I think I also included a few additional Tolman terms in this week's overview. So you might see backing, rebuttals, and qualifiers also listed along with the rest. I don't really want to get into those today. Again, let's keep this light. It's a short week, and I'll have a more full lecture, a more jam-packed lecture next week, and I'll talk about these terms a little bit more, but they're pretty self-explanatory. Backing just means additional evidence, and we are going to need multiple sources and multiple pieces of evidence at certain times. So sometimes you'll need that additional backing. And I do want to talk more about rebuttals, because at some point you will need to respond to an opposing viewpoint or an opposing position. And that's kind of important. That's one of the requirements of Essay 4. So we'll talk a little bit more about that next week when I get into more detail about Essay 4. And again, next week we're also going to be doing some research We're going to be talking about some MLA citation rules. So we have a lot to cover. I'll have a week 14 lecture and a week 15 lecture to kind of fit everything in that we need to know and do for Essay 4. But for now, let me just give you a general introduction to the assignment so you can at least start thinking about it. And we are using 50 essays. So in the past, we were coming up with our own topics for our previous essays. But this time, I want you guys to find an essay in the book. And it does not matter if we've read the essay, if it was assigned as a homework assignment, or if it's one that we haven't looked at. It's totally up to you. I just want you to pick a piece that you like, or just a piece that you think is interesting and worth pursuing further. But you're going to end up building an argument around what you see in that particular essay. And the direction your argument takes, the strategies you use, are largely up to you. You might end up disagreeing with the position or viewpoint being expressed in your chosen essay. Or you might want to support it and help to drive it home. But this is going to be kind of a two-step process. So over the Thanksgiving long weekend, I don't really have any other work for you guys to do except, I guess, for our last discussion post. I do want you to do that. But you should start combing through the book and looking for an essay that you might like to use, because the first thing you need to do is kind of diagram or analyze that essay. And you need to identify the topic. Like, what is the essay about? What is the larger issue that the essay is sort of addressing? And then you need to identify the argument, the thesis of the essay. All right, what is their position? What is the actual, argument in your own words? And once you've done that, you can decide where you land in this debate that's sort of being carried out, or at least a snapshot of a larger debate that you can see in this essay. Again, are you in agreement with the author, or do you want to oppose the author? Or do you want to reach some kind of compromise? So it's going to be very important that you identify the larger issue or debate that's going on. So I would encourage you guys, when you're looking through 50 essays, I don't have the book in front of me, of course, I'm not prepared, but you guys need to look at some of those tables of contents. They have multiple tables of contents, which can be a little confusing. That's true of both the 5th and 6th edition. But one of the tables of contents is organized by rhetorical style, or writing style, and they have an argumentative section, like an argumentative category, where the most argumentative essays in the book can be found. I recommend going there. And again, we've read some of those. In fact, we're reading some of those right now as we look at examples of argumentative writing. But again, you can grab something that we've just read, but you can also grab something that we've read weeks ago, because other essays that aren't in the argumentative category, I think, could still be considered argumentative in a way. Because like I said, really all essays have a thesis. Some are more argumentative than others, but they all have some kind of larger purpose, and a lot of them are saying something, or they're wanting us to believe or feel something. So even if it's not classified as argumentative, you can still use it. But if you're kind of overwhelmed by all the choices, go to the argumentative section and you can kind of narrow it down a little bit. But if you've read an essay that you just really liked way back in September, October, whenever, and you just enjoyed it, revisit it. And it's especially good if you've already written about it in a discussion post. I mean, I don't want you to reuse what you've already done, but you've already come up with some ideas, and you might be able to repackage some of your ideas or claims that you made about previous essays. So anything in the book is fair game. Anything in 50 essays, but it has to be in 50 essays. That's the only rule. So you shouldn't have to look long, but over the break, you might want to go ahead and, pick your essay. We have one final discussion post due at the end of the week. And I'll tell you what, I'll make this announcement as well, but I know it can be hard to finish on a Sunday night on Thanksgiving weekend. So I'll give you guys one additional day to complete discussion post 10. It'll be due on Monday. I think that's the last day of November, the 30th. I'll give you the extra day, and that is our final discussion post. So after you turn that in, you can turn your attention fully to SA4. So again, next week we have a lot to cover. I might even have 2 parts to my lecture. We're going to look at an outline, we're going to talk about research, and we're going to get moving on SA4. So have a great Thanksgiving, and I will see you next week.